I just call it my vulva/vagina. Like, I've made like a really conscious effort, I think, to just refer to it anatomically. Like,
but then I think now I just call it a pussy, but that's just because, I don't know, is that a bit male gazy?
I refer to it as a vagina or a vulva. I think I usually refer to it as a vagina just because it's colloquially like more acceptable.
I probably just call my vulva it, which is worrying actually when we think about that.
Because I personally like to have pubic hair. I don't really like to shave. I don't like the way it looks on me. I have been very afraid of like engaging with like oral sex with partners, because I'm like, I don't want you to do something that you're not like finding pleasurable, because you know, like porn and everything, you know, it's nice and like dainty and shaved. And I'm like, oh no, I don't want anyone to have to like engage with this because this isn't attractive.
My name's Laura COFIELD, and I was a PhD researcher at the University of Sussex. My thesis explored a history of female body hair removal in 20th and 21st century Britain.
So, how and why did the first instances of women shaving in the 20th century come about?
I mean, the first instance that I looked at was within medical science, and the routinization of pubic hair removal, particularly in childbirth, and what became pre-delivery sort of preparation of women's bodies for childbirth. So particularly women that went into hospitals to give birth, they would receive pubic hair shaving and also an enema, and it was a way to sort of cleanse the birth canal so that babies were born in the most aseptic conditions doctors thought they could be. And this came from a concern for the health of babies in the early 20th century. Later on, I then looked at sort of when pubic hair shaving and removal became popularised sort of within wider society, not just within medicine, and kind of pinpointed, I mean, bikini line shaving's always kind of been a thing, but like extensive body hair, like pubic hair removal, kind of popularised in the early 2000s with like the emergence of the Brazilian wax and Sex and the City and things like that.
So why do you think women have felt the need to shave their pubic hair? Is it societal or personal pressure?
I think it's both. I would say that particularly with pubic hair removal, it's kind of a different region of body hair removal to face, armpits, whatever, because it is so inherently tied to genitalia and women's sexual identity. So if you are a remover or not, this is, society has told women that this is important as a preparation for sex. This is in current times. So particularly like what I was just saying about the childbirth thing, the idea that pubic hair removal is more hygienic, more cleansing, and therefore prepares you for sex is definitely something that society has sort of taken on, and this is an impact on women. But I do also think like women have agency and can make their own decisions about this. So there is like an element of personal autonomy in there as well, of course.
How do you think the association between body hair and female radicalism affects perspectives on body hair?
When we think of feminism, we think of women with a lot of body hair. This is just like the perception that we've grown up with in society. And I do think it's interesting because my research shows that maybe not all feminists in the 60s and 70s like really embraced this idea of body hair, like leaving your body hair, and at the same time coming into feminism, the generation that grew up in the 90s and the 2000s, I don't think there is necessarily, I think there are still ghosts of the image of 60s and 70s women's lib, and that has almost made the feminism's relationship now with body hair more complicated, because we're aware of the social constraints on women's bodies. We're aware that the norm for body hair removal is problematic, and it comes from consumerism, and it comes from, you know, the idea that women are hairless, which we're not. And at the same time, it's really hard to resist. It's complicated to resist.
To what extent do you think female body hair follows trends? Like, for example, like bushes being associated with like retro fashion.
When you read women's magazines, I know people think women's magazines are really monotonous and they don't change in their content, but actually they do. And there's things like in Jackie in 67, there was just this moment where they were telling their readers, don't get rid of your body hair because it's really trendy to be a liberated lady right now. Like really picking up on that, like feminism emerging. Like a year later, they were like, forget what we said, start removing your body hair again. And you can see the same thing now almost. I think particularly 2014 was a year where the bush was supposedly back. There was, like mannequins in American Apparel that had merkins on, and there was a lot of sort of blogging, and like feminist sites were really sort of getting into like bush politics. And it was almost that like retro sort of let's go back, not go back to the 70s, but it was becoming fashionable again, and almost that allowed pubic hair to be accepted. But then I always feel like really conflicted with that, because it shouldn't just be because it's fashionable that women with bushes are allowed. It should be, yeah, you know what I mean?
I think the first vulva I actually saw was probably a birthing video in year 3. I didn't even register the vulva. I was like, wow, how is that coming out of what she has and I have that? How does it grow?
I'm Laura, I'm 22 and I'm a midwife who qualified in August 2020.
What do birthing parents ask or say the most about their vulvas during the process?
And normally the first thing is, oh, sorry, I haven't shaved. Or, sorry if it's patchy, I can't see. And we're like, I wouldn't notice. I'm not looking at that, but that's probably the most common one that we get, yeah.
And what point do they stop caring about like what it looks like and who sees it?
So depending on if they're in labour, they get to a point of the pain where they normally just strip off and just stood there naked and are like, sorry. And we're like, it's fine. Don't worry about it. Or they get, after a couple of examinations or something, it's kind of, by that point, it's got to the point where, yes, this is just a clinical thing. It's not like the first one is always like a bit, oh God, I hate it. And then they're like, okay, it's fine.
That kind of made me think about like the husband stitch. So can you kind of explain more about that to me and why did it come about and what's the problem?
I mean, we still get sometimes, I think they're just nervous and they don't know what to say, but a partner will say, can you put an extra stitch in? And we're like, well, it clearly was good enough in the first place, so no, I'm not going to put another stitch in. But I think, yeah, it's just, you get people saying like society, don't you, about having saggy vaginas, or if someone slept with lots of people, and so they think, they presume, well, a head's come out of it, a whole baby has come out, so it must have stretched. And it's kind of, yeah, then you have to do that whole like, no, it's a muscle, it's designed to stretch. In sex, it stretches and then it goes back again. Otherwise, it would just not work very well. But yeah, I think there is that kind of, but it's not very funny. It happens fairly often.
So obviously you must have seen a lot of vulvas.
Mm-hmm.
So were you surprised about the variety when you first started? Was there anything you didn't realise?
I think so. Because you get, like, you know, in theory, like, obviously everyone's different. Or myself, I'd never seen, like, a black woman's vagina, or what, like, Asian people. I'd only ever seen mine. So that was, like, a white woman's, which is kind of the view that if you're going to have any view in the media of a vulva, it's probably more likely to be a white woman's vulva than it is of anyone of colour or anything like that. So that was also just not, I mean, it's no massive difference, but it's just of note. You kind of went, oh, okay, yeah, I suppose so. And yeah, there are just so many different kinds, and people are always quite apologetic about them in a weird sort of way. But yeah, we can't, they say in theory, blah, 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 but all of our test dolls are like plastic, nice preem little things. They're obviously just there for like showing how to deliver babies. So they haven't put that much effort into the whole vulva bit. That's just kind of like, hole. So, and they were mostly white skin toned dolls as well. I think we had a couple of kind of black women dolls. But yeah, that was kind of just getting used to that. And even just the changes in cultural views on pubic hair and whether you shave it or whether you don't. And all of that is that you don't really talk about that very much. But yeah, they definitely could do more in preparing you for it, because you just go out and you're just like, oh, there you go, there's one, and you're like, oh, okay. And at first you feel really awkward because you're like, you have to look, but also you don't just want to stare. But when you're learning, especially before you deliver, you watch 5 deliveries as a student. So at that point, you're just watching and you are just staring. And then you'll suddenly be very aware of the fact that you're just staring and you're like, oh my gosh, sorry. But you're not staring in a weird way. You're watching the delivery of a baby. I'm not just looking for fun. But there is, yeah, getting used to that is a bit strange. Or like if the first time you see, I don't know, something that you just haven't seen before, it is still a bit like, oh, okay. Because it is different. And we've had women who've had babies in other countries and sometimes have not had good post care, and then they come in and there's like their perineum's a bit degraded, or there's kind of like a fistula, a hole down, and that is kind of really a bit off-putting at first because you're like, oh, I don't know what I'm quite looking at, and you have to kind of like poker face it because you're just like, okay, it's fine. This is obviously normal for her. But it can sometimes be a bit like, because something has not been fixed properly and they don't know because they've just carried on and their life hasn't been that affected by it. They don't really teach you about that issue.
I think just the existence of modesty in itself and the fact that we have to wear clothes as a society will always count towards that. Like that almost fear or reluctance to experience naked bodies, except in very specific settings.
My name is SUVI and I'm a designer and illustrator from Brighton, and I use knitwear and textile design to raise awareness about vulvas and destigmatize them.
What was your inspiration for the vulva pieces?
So I went to my final year of uni with the idea that I wanted to write about something that makes me uncomfortable and makes other people uncomfortable. So developing from that, I wanted to focus on a topic that has really nothing to do with my degree. So I did a fashion textile degree. But ironically, from that onwards, then obviously developed into, 2 pieces of clothing. And my tutor for my dissertation was a male as well. So I wanted to make sure that even if nothing else came from that dissertation, it would at least challenge someone's views who is not stereotypically a vulva carrier. So, yeah.
So I wanted to talk about the colours on the dungarees. So they're very striking, very bold, but they're not the typical human vulva colour per se. What was your kind of thought process with choosing the colour palette?
Yeah, so it was exactly that. So I wanted them to be bright enough that they would attract attention and they would make people look twice. Because the print itself is quite ambiguous, so it kind of that looks like seashells or leaves, but when people look again, they realise these actually vulvas. And especially with the colours, like you said, they're not associated necessarily with female anatomy. Female anatomy. And so using like blue colours to represent it, for example, which is considered quite a masculine colour in general, I think that's itself is questioning a little bit of the stereotype. And I like the fact that you can cover yourself in them without being too on other people's faces that are wearing vulvas, but you absolutely are also pushing them into other people's faces to question their views.
I thought it was very playfully ironic that you have dungarees which you use to cover vulvas, but they're covered in vulvas. What was your thought process behind this?
It was pretty much exactly that. So cover people into this taboo subject that even myself, when I first got this, I was uncomfortable wearing outside. But the empowerment that came with it, because you're so obviously carrying vulvas and a diversity of vulvas as well, which is one of the main things I wrote about my dissertation, was how it's completely airbrushed thing. Like people as young as 9 want labiaplasty because they think they look wrong in their vulvas, and because these things aren't talked about, they're just hidden, aren't they? And if something's hidden, you can't change it. You have to bring them into light first.
So do you think it's important for the visual arts to confront this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when it comes to quite a playful thing. I think like a lot of feminist issues and gender issues, I think, are represented quite from a serious point of view, as they should be. They're serious issues, but I found that when you make this bit of a humour element, you start up conversations that happen outside sex education and happen outside these official settings. And I think those are the conversations that actually make change and push it forward.
This piece was obviously intended to create change. What kind of impacts did you hope for it to have?
So it's definitely been bigger than I thought it would be. I think it's been quite mad seeing it pop up in places that I didn't expect it to pop up. So this collaboration with Lucy and Yak especially, it kind of just came across by me tagging them into my Instagram picture and not even expecting a reply back, and just wrote from there. And the impact it's had, it's pretty insane. I love seeing them around. You can see people wearing them. They sometimes look a little bit uncomfortable, and then you see them again and they're just like absolutely buzzing with light and empowerment. And some of the feedback I've gotten back, people having conversations with their daughters, for example, in families where vulvas aren't even mentioned before. And it's that kind of support that I think a lot of our generation missed out as they're growing up and have really distorted views about their bodies because of that. And I feel if we can shift that for the generations to come, that is going to solve a lot of problems, because this goes far further than just the female body. It affects obviously like transgender people, and when it comes to birthing and just body dysmorphia, all this is all tied together, not to mention just overall feminist issue as.
And I think that part of it's education. And that's the thing, you see the answer for everything. But I think having that start point is a really good idea for future kind of institutionalized change around vulva acceptance and diversity.
Really, really nice. But yeah, just normalizing it, talking about it like it's just any other body part, I think would really help. Just
breaking down the stigma around human nudity itself would do a huge amount for the stigma that we have surrounding just genitalia as a whole.
I think openness is a really good step. If you talk about it and you talk about your own insecurities and like how you feel about your vulva and what a normal vulva can look like then other people are going to be like empowered to do the same.